Hi, AP Psych class. In this video, we're going to talk about how memory is constructed when we retrieve that information. And it's not just replayed like a video, like an exact replica. We'll be seeing a couple short video clips within this video. So make sure you have your notes open. And if you're taking Cornell notes, don't forget to rewind, pause when necessary. And let's get started. So when we talk about memory construction, a couple of terms that aren't in our textbook but are important to understand. When we retrieve a memory, we really build the memory from different components into our short-term memory. One of the things that happens is the process called leveling. This is when our episodic memories are simplified down to basic components based on our selective attention. And remember from our discussion on mental set, everybody's selective attention is going to be different. So our leveling or retelling of episodic experiences can differ greatly, even though we might have been involved in the same situation as somebody else. An example that I like to use is imagine telling someone about a movie you saw recently at the theater or on Netflix. The movie might have been 2 hours long, but when you tell me about it, it might only take you a couple of minutes to do this. You've leveled that movie down. It's as if you erased some of the non-important details as you see it in the movie, and we just get the gist or just the highlights of the movie. That is leveling, when we only remember the highlights as we saw it. On the other hand, sharpening can also take place, in which our selective attention is drawn to such a specific finite detail that other details, whether they be contextual or otherwise, are forgotten because they're not noticed. An example I remember from a couple of years ago during a vice presidential debate, someone focused on a candidate that drank water over 32 times during the 1 hour debate. And all they could recall was how much water the candidate drank and that he must have been nervous. Remembered very little about the substance of any of the responses during that debate. So that would be sharpening, where they just remember one aspect. And again, that's based on selective attention. Now, one of the very famous researchers we'll talk about is Elizabeth Loftus. And she demonstrated the dangers of misinformation effect. Now, if you reverse the term, it's the effect of misinformation. So post-episodic experiences can be kind of woven into the actual experience, and when we recall it, we recall the misinformation as if it actually happened. Now, in a very famous experiment, Loftus and Palmer in 1974 showed a group of students a video of a minor accident. Everybody saw the same video. Afterwards, they were divided into 2 groups, or maybe it was 3 groups, I think. And they were each quizzed about the accident. And some of the group members in one group were asked, how fast do you think the cars were going when they smashed each other? Another group was asked, how fast were the cars going when they hit each other? And then a third group was asked, how fast were the cars going when they contacted each other? Now, a week later, everybody was brought in one at a time. Of course, they weren't in the groups. They were asked one at a time. And they were asked, we forgot to say, did you guys see any broken glass? Well, the interesting thing was that the group that asked the question, how fast were the cars going when they smashed each other, and I remember that question was post-video witness, most of those people said yes, that they had seen broken glass, even though no broken glass occurred. So in this experiment, sorry, I'm jumping around here, remember they got questions, how fast were they going when they smashed into each other? The average estimate was about 41 miles an hour. If asked how fast were the cars going when they hit each other, the average is about 34 miles an hour. And when they contacted each other, about 31 miles an hour. So there's a 10 mile an hour difference So the question caused a change in the memory of speed, but how fast were they going when they hit each other versus smashed into each other? This misinformation of smashed caused people to misremember seeing broken glass. So remember, after exposure to an event, subtle misinformation, the way a question is asked, the actual types of questions, can cause us to add or delete information from our memory. And we're all susceptible to this. And the scary thing is, most of us can't tell the difference between the real and imagined information. So when we witness an event, imagine an eyewitness who gets a question about what somebody was wearing, the way they looked, glasses, hair, hat. They may incorporate that information and misremember later on, but not knowingly. And it can happen as time passes. So when does it most likely happen? As the clarity of a memory begins to fade over time. Young children are more susceptible to it than are older adults. And it tends to happen with post-event information. So not information that occurred during the event, but information or experiences that occurred after an event. And people don't really know the difference. The question is, do we know the difference? We don't. Our confidence in a memory has little to do with its accuracy, especially if time passes. But interestingly enough, when we're asked to retrieve real or imagined memories, when we're in a brain scan like a functional MRI scan, the hippocampus is always active when we're retrieving a real episodic memory, but it is not active when we are retrieving an altered or a confabulated memory. And a confabulated memory just believes an inaccurate memory or a false memory that is unintentional. So we're not really intentionally lying. We've just incorporated other events into a memory so it becomes inaccurate. Some more examples of this happening. In 1999, Weissman conducted a fake seance with college students. There were 25 college students who had an actor run the seance. And as people tried to remember loved ones who were lost, and they were joining hands, and they were asked to focus on, did the table move? Because if the spirit enters the room, that would mean that the table would move. The spirit would move the table. And he would be, yes, you're moving it. Can you feel it? You're doing it. Somebody's here. You can feel it. And then 2 weeks later, when they had people come back in and filling out a survey, most people believed, or 34%, not most, but 34% remembered it actually moving, even though it had not. Let's look at a short video clip of Elizabeth Loftus saying how easy it is to implant a false memory into a college student.
Can you go so far as to suggest an entire memory of something that never happened?
Chris is the subject of a false memory experiment. The Loftus researchers had several of his family members record in a journal some real events shared by the family. A false event, being lost in a shopping mall at the age of 5, was added to the journal, which Chris read and ultimately remembered as real.
I remember getting lost and I was crying, and I remember that day I was so scared I thought I'd never see my family again. I knew I was in real trouble. I remember the stores, maybe I sort of remember the stores. An older man approached me. He was tall, and I don't know his age, but he was older. He had a flannel shirt on. I remember the flannel shirt, and I remember my mom told me never to do that again. And
Well, in terms of Chris's memory, there was no man, there was no flannel shirt, there was no mother who said, don't ever do this again.
Using deception in psychological research is a controversial but sometimes unavoidable practice. When the Loftus research team informed Chris that they had implanted a false memory, they followed a debriefing procedure designed to minimize any distress that participating in the study might have caused.
If there were 3 words that I would come up with to describe what memory is, I would say memory is suggestive, it's subjective, It's malleable.
Nina told.
Sorry about that. So focus on that word malleable. Malleable means moldable or changeable. And I like how Elizabeth Loftus suggests that our memories can change over time as events occur post episode. So misinformation effect can grow as memory fades. And as we recall the inaccurate memory, we re-encode it into our long-term memory as it was changed, not as it actually happened. Another example of an eyewitness and how inaccuracy can occur, let's take a look at this short clip of an experiment at a university.
Think back and recall some of the most important memories in your life. What if someone told you they didn't happen, or at least they didn't happen the way you remember them? Well, as you're about to see for yourselves just how your mind can trick your memory and how some factors beyond your control can cause your brain to create its own false reality. Watch our Fox 5 memory test. We came here to Washington College on Maryland's Eastern Shore to put memory to the test, to show you how your mind can manipulate your memory. Professor George Spillich, the chairman of the psychology department, is testing these students, but they don't know it. They think he just wants their impressions of social customs.
Well, the 3 video clips are fairly short. I'm going to show them 1, 2, 3. I'd like you not to talk about them while I'm showing them to you. And then at the end, I'm going to ask you a few questions about each video.
One of the clips is from the Alfred Hitchcock classic Rear Window. Pay close attention to this particular short segment. Try to remember everything you see. After the students watched what you just did, the professor had them fill out a short questionnaire. Then a few days later, he asked them to come back, telling them he had mistakenly left out some questions.
It's now just about 2 weeks after that first screening, and we're back here at Washington College. We've got the students back as well, and we're going to ask them some questions about that film clip they saw. What they don't know is the questions are going to be about some things they did see, some things that never happened.
See how you would answer the test. Professor Spillich asked the students this. Did the artistic woman slip as she went down the stairs? And did she knock a statue over?
This is about the normal percentage of people who misrecall information.
Now, the answer may seem obvious because you just saw the clip, but remember, the students viewed it days earlier. And 1/3 of the students in this test say they saw things happen even though they're not in the movie. Scientists get the same results in experiment after experiment.
I really thought I remembered both of them occurring, actually. Like, when he said that, when I read him on there, I could actually see it in my head.
So I remembered her slipping on something.
I kind of remember her brushing against the sculptures.
From the parts that I did remember, it almost seemed appropriate that that would have happened. So.
In the case of these students, their memory simply filled in the blanks, creating a new reality for them.
We tend to remember the average of many events, or we tend to remember what's reasonable to have expected that would have occurred, but that doesn't mean that that's actually what occurred.
So your memory is shaped by your life and experiences. It doesn't mean, though, that you can't trust all the images it generates. Just remember, the pictures in your mind may be made up of more than you can remember.
Okay. So as we move on, we'll talk about that experiment a little bit later in class. Another example of how memory constructions can be fallible is source amnesia. Remember, misinformation and source amnesia are often confused, so let's make sure we can distinguish between the two. So remember, Elizabeth Loftus says that memories are malleable or changeable, capable of being easily shaped or influenced. So source amnesia isn't incorporating false information into our memories. It is actually misremembering sources for our memories. So we might remember information from a movie, from a previous experience, even from a dream or a book that we read, and incorporate that into our memory. So something that actually happened that we read, and we incorporate it into a memory as if it had happened along with another memory. Poole and Lindsay demonstrated an example of this when they had preschoolers have a visit from Mr. Science. And Mr. Science did a lot of these scientific demonstrations like balloons blowing up and things like that. Several months later, the experimenters had the parents read to the kids some stories about Mr. Science that were real and some that were false. So do you remember when Mr. Science did the balloon experiment in which purple fluid sprayed out of the balloons, and the kids like, oh, okay. Later, 40% of the kids recalled experiencing things that didn't happen, that Mr. Science never did. So that's actually a pretty significant number of kids who remembered the experience, but the experience was as it was read to them, not as they actually saw it in their classroom. And that's source amnesia. We're going to stop there. Remember, if you're doing Cornell notes, to complete your creative connections, and we will talk to you tomorrow. Thanks for watching.